feels a little weird to be recording again, but I'm back. Things probably look a little bit different. That's because my camera here, I used to record with this camera. Whoops, knocked my mic. Was a Sony ZV-E10. It broke. I went on a trip to Thailand and I was getting out of a taxi and I dropped it, and so that no longer works. So we're going to be using a web camera today, just sitting on top of my monitor. It probably looks worse. It definitely looks worse, but we got to use what we got to use to get things done. But today I'm going to be talking about the Kyoto and the Hozoan arc of Vagabond, which spans from chapters 22 to chapter 78. So yeah, let's get into it. So chapter 22 kicks off with Takehiko getting the new name of Miyamoto Musashi. The name Miyamoto comes from his village, so he'll always be carrying his home village town name with him. And Musashi, I believe, means warrior from a really quick Google search that I did, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But we see Musashi, he's walking around Kyoto, and he runs into a swordsman from the Yoshioka school. That swordsman, who we later learn is Seijiro, warns him not to go to the school with that bloodthirsty look on his face, because they're going to kill him, because they're going to interpret that, and they're just going to kill him. And it's at this moment that we see a different side from Musashi, where he answers back that he's prepared to die, but he doesn't plan on just throwing his life away. And from this line alone, we can already grasp a significant shift in his thought process. Initially, Musashi didn't even understand why he was born, and through his anger, he adopted a survival of the fittest mentality and believed that it was simply, kill or be killed. This is why he was so confused when Takeuan refused to kill him, believing that he kind of deserved it because he had already killed so many, and now it was just his time, and he had no right to value his own life, having, mercilessly taken the lives of so many other people. So we can already see a really drastic shift in his mindset, and that now that he values his own life. Interestingly enough, though, Musashi still plans on being unrivaled under the heavens, which is interesting, but I like it. His mindset and his approach to his goal has kind of changed, but not the goal itself. So it's good to see that he hasn't done a complete 180 after his conversation with Takeuan. Chapter 23 begins with Musashi entering the Yoshioka school, and he just goes and he says he wants to challenge the master, who we actually learn is actually Seijiro, but we'll get to that later. We see some of the other characters. A few years have passed. We see an older Musashi, obviously. We see an older Akemi and older Matahachi. Matahachi is a bum. He's an alcoholic burger who doesn't have a job, and he's living off of his wife's prostitution job. So not much going on. Not much going on for him. I won't speak too much about them currently, because I don't want to rant about Matahachi, because I can see myself doing that, because if you've read the series, there's a lot going on with Matahachi, and I have a lot of choice words about him, but we're going to ignore that for now. We're going to move on. So Musashi is actually successfully taking on the Yoshioka school, and he feels pride within himself that he's able to hold his ground against one of the most, renowned schools in Japan. As he and the other character's name is Ueda, he's like another important figure within the school. As they're exchanging sword swings, that's when Denshichiro walks in. And Denshichiro, he's the younger brother of Seijiro, and so he's kind of like the, vice head of the Yoshioka school, something like that. We met Denshichiro briefly when he slapped the shit out of Matahachi, so that was pretty interesting. So right now, it looks like the order of strength is Seijiro, who's the head of the clan, and Denshichiro, who's his younger brother, and then Ueda is like just some guy. From the internal and external dialogue we get from Denshichiro, we can kind of interpret that he believes that he should be the one to head the school, as Seijiro is always seen with Akemi and other promiscuous women around probably the pleasure areas of the town. And he's kind of bringing down the reputation of the school by hanging with that crowd. So Seijiro actually ends up making his way into the school, and Musashi is not leaving without fighting Seijiro. Matahachi is spying from the outside, and he's feeling kind of inspired to relive his glory days, which, let's be honest, weren't very glorious at all, but he kind of feels nostalgic for that time period when him and Musashi or Takehiko at the time were kind of going to war and trying to strive to be great. Seijiro cuts Matahachi's forehead with a fast draw of his blade, demonstrating pretty much the skill diff and the skill gap between him and Musashi. And then he just leaves, and then he's like, I'm gonna go back to the pleasure quarters, because he doesn't want to fight Musashi. If I had to make a guess, it's probably because he doesn't want to fight Musashi because he knows he would kill him, and he sees potential in him and his unwavering determination and ambition. So he's like, I'm not gonna kill you now because you look like you'd be fun later, so I'm just gonna show you the skill diff and I'm gonna leave. But Denshinshiro doesn't take that kind of respect. So Musashi and Denshinshiro begin to fight while Matahachi is kind of working up the courage from the outside to like run in and save him. At this point, he doesn't know that it's Takezo or Musashi. Musashi receives a lethal blow across his chest, and at the same time, Matahachi comes across the sake that the Yoshioka school has at the bottom of their basement, and he starts to drink because he's an alcoholic bum. This parallels what we saw in the last arc. This time, instead of Matahachi, laying the pipe with Oko while Musashi was in there fighting all those people trying to like save Oko because he didn't know where she was. This time, Matahachi's just getting drunk, and so it seems to be a very common trope with him. He seems to indulge in these very like frivolous pleasures, lust, greed, things like that. He'll go for those first, and he ends up hating himself for it later. So he's in their basement getting drunk. It's kind of interesting to wonder about, would Matahachi have made that same decision if he knew it was Musashi that was in there fighting, or if he would have jumped in and saved him if he knew it was him at the time? I don't think so, but an interesting thought. So with Matahachi being drunk in the basement, he ends up knocking over a candle and the whole Yoshioka school burns down. And so Musashi and Denshinshiro have to end their fight. But Denshinshiro tells Musashi that he must live on as he's going to vow to kill him later. At first, the sequence kind of rubbed me the wrong way because it's the first time I've had this feeling when I was reading Vagabond. I generally don't like it when a character survives an encounter by which seems like random chance. Right, Musashi living on here relies heavily on Matahachi being there in the first place and knocking over the candle and burning down the school and the fight having to end. From my perspective, it kind of seems like Inoue kind of wrote himself into a corner. Musashi kind of, was in a fight that he couldn't win, and he had to kind of find a way to get him out. And I'd like to think that maybe Inoue had this all planned out. He probably did, because Matahachi was in the same city at the same time, and always planned for him to be there. So I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. It's probably not unplanned, but I think that's just kind of how it feels, when you're reading it. So Musashi actually ends up getting carried away by Matahachi, away from the fire, that is, and then he gets picked up by Takuan and a kid named Jotaro. Another little bit of luck, but not necessarily as bad as the previous instance that I just mentioned. But in this conversation that Musashi is having with Takuan, it seems that Musashi has feelings for Otsu, who's their childhood friend from the first arc, and basically can't stop having wet dreams, which seems kind of weird to me because that was his best friend's fiance, and he hasn't seen her since. And I'm not saying that Matahachi deserves Otsu. He definitely does not deserve Otsu. It just, being that Musashi hasn't seen her since, it's most likely that he had these feelings for a while that was his best friend's fiance, which just seems kind of odd to me personally, but hey, to each their own, I guess. Also, Otsu is with the Yagyu clan, which is where Denshinshiro is actually headed. Musashi sees his constant thinking of Otsu as a distraction and getting in the way of him becoming a better swordsman. Takuan gives him some advice here, telling him that attempting to ignore his thoughts will preoccupy him more than if he was just to accept the thoughts. And this makes a lot of sense if you've, lived at all, but it's a really hard conclusion to come to on your own. So I think it's some really good advice that he's giving him here. And he tells him that if he's too preoccupied with a single leaf, then you won't see the entire tree. Preoccupied with a single tree, you'll miss the entire forest. I really like this quote. One, I think it sounds super philosophical and cool, so I wanted to say it. But beyond that, I think what we're actually getting into here is to kind of accept and see all things in a way, right? I feel like a lot of like sword stuff in anime always have this kind of idea to see everything at once and see all of everything in its entirety, and things like that. So I kind of like it. He also tells him that if he's too preoccupied with other things, then his sword will not be true, and that'll lead to Musashi's death. So a lot of good advice here from Takuan, and I think Musashi ends up taking a lot away from it. So really good advice from the monk. So this leads us into the next arc, which is the Hozomen arc. The Kyoto arc was pretty short. It was only 14 chapters, and essentially serves as an introduction to the broader world and the broader characters, and a reintroduction into who is now, Miyamoto Musashi. It was really good. It was really entertaining. I enjoyed it. And aside from that one thing I talked about where I felt like, it might have wrote himself into a corner, but maybe not, but like that whole thing. Other than that, really good arc, solid arc, 8 out of 10. Don't really have any problems with it. So Musashi and Takuan are continuing their conversation, and in my first review, one of the first things that I spoke about was how one of the strongest themes in Vagabond is connection, right? Potentially the strongest theme in Vagabond is connection. And Musashi feels as though his thoughts of Otsu are kind of wicked and that they're getting in the way of him becoming a better swordsman. Takuan explains to him that the only reason these thoughts are a hindrance is because of because of his attempts to repress them and repress his thoughts and feelings. He continues saying that all aspects of Musashi, the one that feels for Otsu, the one that plays pranks on Takeuan, and the one that wants to become the strongest under the sun, the one that's dedicated to the sword, all of them are Musashi, and that he should learn to accept all parts of himself. So this is kind of what I was just getting at a minute ago, about how I feel like a lot of swordsmen and swords stuff in anime are all about like, accepting everything as is. Kind of like stoicism a little bit, just kind of accepting things are as they is. And you guys know what I'm getting at? You know what I'm getting at. So yeah, Musashi must learn how to see everything in its entirety, not to become preoccupied with a single leaf or a single tree. And for the first time after this conversation, Musashi isn't trying to play into his demon persona. He admits to himself that he wants to hold Otsu and that he feels alone. And he admits that to Jotaro and to Takeuan, that Otsu is his reason for living. And I think like that is probably the like biggest thing that has ever come out of like these last 20 something chapters. Now granted, it's been some years since then, but back when he was Takazo, this would have never ever came out of his mouth. So not only is he able to admit it to himself, but he's able to admit it to another person. He's able to say it out loud, and kind of like, when you say things out loud, it kind of like brings things into reality. So again, like really good development here from Musashi, and I really like it. So moving back to the story, Jotaro has no family and is basically Musashi when Musashi was a kid, but he's just not nearly as tough. And so Musashi decides to let Jotaro be his disciple and follow him around and all that stuff. So as they both head to the Hozoen temple, they come across an old man. Jotaro, who's kind of approaching the man, asking for directions, and Musashi feels kind of this old man's like his aura, like he's literally aura farming as he's oh my god, he's like aura farming while he's farming. Anyway, Jotaro approaches this old man as he's aura farming, and Musashi kind of feels that aura from him, and it kind of tells Jotaro to like stop, and is trying to stop him because he feels all this like malice coming from this old man. And it kind of reminds me of what Takeuan did back to Tsujikaze Kohei, when Kohei came to kill Musashi when he was strung up in the tree. We see that Takeuan did the same thing, which kind of leads me to believe that Takeuan's not just a monk. He probably has some prior fighting experience, some prior, like swordsmanship, something like that, but kind of basically what this old man did. We cut over to Toji, who has already arrived at the Hozoen temple, and I don't know if I mentioned Toji earlier, but he's from the Yoshioka school. He's like Seijiro's like retainer, like he follows him around or whatever. But one of the first things he does when he gets there is he lets one of the spearmen feel his third leg, just lets him like rub all up on it. He shows him which way he's leaning, grabs his hand, moves him over. So you see, I'm actually leaning this way. You know what I mean? Like here to get a good grip, full hand of dick and balls. Yeah. So we cut back over to the old farmer, who explains that Musashi is graceless and clumsy, and he's constantly emanating this bloodthirsty "rah, I'ma kill you" aura from him all the time. And he describes himself as a mirror reflecting Musashi's bloodthirst, and I guess this more accurately describes what he and Takeuan are able to do. So the old man continues, and stating that all of the enemies that Musashi has fought were only enemies because he forced them to become so. Most likely through the way he carries himself, walking around with all this bloodthirst, people instinctively fear him, and then they act on that fear by trying to fight him or kill him because they're scared. The old man ends his speech by telling Musashi that killing these people who he's basically forcing to fight, whether he realizes it or not, is not true strength. And that kind of like strikes a chord with Musashi, because obviously he's looking to become invincible under the sun. It's an interesting conversation, and I'm not sure if I agree with him. Obviously, there are different kinds of strength other than the physical, but I wonder what the old man believes true strength is. I still think, these people might have felt like they had to fight, but you still lost. So, anyway, Musashi takes this to heart, and he's pretty frustrated that he doesn't understand what the old man means, which kind of makes sense. His goal is to be invincible under the heavens and the strongest, and since the old man appears to be strong basis of how he kind of emanated, or I guess reflected, that bloodthirst, Musashi is valuing what he says, because Musashi is inherently recognizing his strength even though he's old. And he kind of says something really similar to what Takeuan says, but in a different way. So remember that Takeuan said, preoccupied with a single leaf, you won't see the tree, and preoccupied with the tree, you'll miss the entire forest. The old man, he says that as long as you live in that narrow worldview of yours, you'll never know what that means. And he's referring to what it means to be truly strong. So as long as you live in that narrow worldview, you'll never know what it means to be truly strong, because Musashi's so his mindset is just so like, if I beat you, I'm stronger and then I'm the strongest. But the old man is telling him that there's more to that he needs to kind of broaden his horizons, and that true strength isn't as, who can cut down who. It's not quite like that. And then he continues on saying that if you're swimming in the ocean, that you'll never realize how vast the ocean actually is. Literally the same thing, right? If you're preoccupied with a tree, you'll miss the whole forest, right? If you're in the ocean, then you'll miss how vast it truly is because you're not taking a step back and viewing it all in its entirety. So really interesting stuff from these two. I won't speak too much on the fights that transpired. They were drawn beautifully, they were choreographed well, and most of all, they were really entertaining. The way that Inoue can convey emotion and strength in his facial expressions is amazing, and not something that I can see many artists do as well as he does. Like the contrast in Musashi's face from before the fight until the point where he started to run away is extremely impressive. Up until this point, we had never seen Musashi have such an expression on his face, and he looks almost unrecognizable, which speaks to how consistent and imperative his facial expressions are to how we perceive him. Unconsciously, we perceive him as a pillar of strength, the indomitable human spirit put to page, but by watching him run away and like his facial expressions, he looks really pitiful. You feel sorry for him, and if you idolize him like Jotaro, you wouldn't want him to be your master either. The running away in and of itself is interesting. It's not something that I would have expected from Musashi, but in hindsight, it seems like the only logical conclusion, because he was getting his ass beat. From the moment Inshun stepped onto the battlefield, I just had this feeling that he wouldn't lose. He just stepped on with like so much confidence and like aura and swagger. And this is also great for Musashi's character as he compares himself to the Tsujikaze guy, not Tsujikaze Kohei, the first guy who doesn't matter, who ran away from him all those years ago. And then he wonders if he is or ever really was strong at all. So because of this revelation, he begins to train under the old man, who we later learn is also from the Hozoen clan. He was like Hozoen Inshun's, I think, father. And he's the founder of the school. We cut over to Matahachi, who I don't want to spend too much time on because I don't like him, but he stole the name of a prominent samurai and is now going by the name of Sasaki Kojiro. And the dichotomy between how Musashi and now Kojiro have acquired their names speaks really well and kind of speaks volumes to how different their characters are. Musashi was essentially reborn when he acquired his name, and he came, chapter 21 or 22 with like this completely different outlook on life. And Matahachi just stole the name, stole the name Kojiro. So I wonder if there's something deeper that I'm missing other than that of how they acquired their names. But that was the first thing I noticed. I think it's probably the most easiest thing to notice and still really interesting. Continuing on, Matahachi gets scammed, but he's actually able to win the fight and get his money back, which is surprising because I didn't think he had it in him. He does this by remembering how he was the only one who was a match for Musashi back in the village, and by remembering how he was kind of like not on par with him, but kind of like one step underneath him. He's able to get a lot of confidence back by realizing that. It'll be interesting to see if Matahachi is able to grow into the name Kojiro or if he'll always be a burger. I don't have any faith in him. I don't think he'll ever grow into the name Sasaki Kojiro. I think he'll just be like, he'll always deep down, he'll always be Matahachi, just because the way he acquired his name, it's just like, it's from the very beginning, it's just not right. And I don't think it'll see him through all the way to the end. The only thing that Matahachi has over Musashi is that he consistently lays pipe. So I might hate him, but I mean, I gotta give him that. That's probably about the only thing that he's able to do. So going back to Musashi, he actually, he ran away, and Inshun kind of leaves him a note saying that he's gonna find him on this day, and then they're gonna fight. And Musashi actually ends up sleeping the day the duel is supposed to happen, which kind of makes him laugh because he was so like nervous and kind of scared really, like coming up to the day. Musashi was fully expecting to die that day, even though he obviously didn't want to die, but he ended up sleeping through it. And he kind of in this moment realizes his own significance. Whether he dies today or tomorrow doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of the universe, and he considers himself blessed for the chance to have his final opponent be somebody as strong as Inshun. It's an interesting shift in his mindset, and hopefully he is able to stay this rational and humble throughout the duration of his fight, which, spoiler alert, he does. His bloodlust is gone, and this newfound calmness he has in his fighting style has left him and Inshun in a deadlock, neither fully advancing or committing an attack. And also just the tension buildup in this scene. I don't know how Inoue did it, but there was like, it was really good. But Musashi's calmness is also directly compared to the calmness of the Yagyu clan master Seki Shuhai Muneyoshi. And so Musashi seems to be on the right track to becoming invincible under the sun. So I do hope that one day he can become like Seki Shuhai and Inoue. And that's pretty much it for the arc. Musashi does win his fight against Inshin. He kind of, I think I'm a bit kind of iffy on the way that it ended. Not necessarily the fact that he won. I'm fine with Musashi winning. I just kind of didn't like that he beat his corpse. I did think it was a little odd, but I guess like as scared as he was, the tension he was feeling, he just kind of had to like, you know, release it all. Still a bit odd though from somebody who just seemed like, you know, the most zen of all zen people. Anyway, that's it for the arc though. That's it for my review. Thanks for listening. Next video will probably be on, I don't know what the next arc is in Vagabond, but that will probably be the next video. Either that or it's going to be a One Piece review. So we'll see what goes up next. Again, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and bye.